Babes, come closer and listen to me very carefully because I'm not going to repeat this ever again. When climate change and global warming finally takes over the earth,
what?
And the earth becomes too hot, hang on, this is the only plant we may be able to grow in our gardens. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a desert rose. Look at the material. Look at the material. And I want to teach you how to take care of this plant and how to grow a gorgeous, beautiful, heavily blooming specimen like this. Without much ado, let's get to the nitty-gritty of this video. First things first, babes, as the name indicates, desert rose. This is a plant that likes it hot. It likes heat. It is native to the Sahel and arid regions of parts of Africa, including my country, Nigeria, and also like the Arabian Peninsula as well. So babes, this is not a plant that you grow if you live in the highlands of Scotland. This is not a plant you grow if you live in the tundras of Vancouver and Canada. No, I would not even advise that you grow this plant indoors, even though there are some people who are currently attempting to grow this plant indoors and in Lekka for that matter. Shout out to the Lekka queen. I'm curious to know how yours fares. Now, I currently grow these guys in my west facing garden, and I've quickly realized that the hotter it is, the faster they grow. Now, several people grow their desert roses for multiple purposes. There are those that grow their desert roses for their foliage and for their blooms, like I do. And there are those that grow their desert roses for their cordexes. So these guys can actually end up having really huge and chunky and big, fat, attractive cordexes. Like there's a whole science and technique behind it. I don't know that, but I'm specifically growing my babies for their foliage and for their flowers. Now, the biggest issue that most beginners have with their desert roses is that they encounter two things: stem rot and root rot. In fact, the major issue, the major cause of this plant dying for most beginners is stem rot. Now babes, when it comes to desert roses, the fact of the matter is that if you want optimum blooms, you are gonna need to prune them. We're gonna touch more on that when it comes to the flowering segment of this video. But pruning is something that you need to do with your desert roses. However, when pruning them, please ensure that you always prune above the cortex. Now, for example, this is the cortex, this fat, chunky, and you can see areas where this plant has been pruned. Here, obviously you prune to encourage a branching and to encourage a fuller plant, but like I said, in doing so, you want to make sure you always prune above the cortex. Say it after me: above the cortex. The further above the cortex you prune, the less likely you are to encounter rot in the cortex. Now, the next thing you need to do to avoid stem rot is to please never prune your desert rose during the rainy or wet seasons. Okay, now it is currently the rainy season in my country, and every experienced desert rose growers knows never to prune their desert roses during the rainy season. The weather is just too humid, too moist, and this can lead to infection of the stem and the cortex. Because of how juicy this plant is, it has a lot of moisture it is retaining, and that moisture can facilitate, infection in the stem and the cortex. So if you're growing these guys in a part of the world that experiences a rainy season and a dry season, wait until the weather is a lot drier before you can prune. Also, whenever you cut this plant or whenever you prune this plant, what I love to do is I always add like cinnamon to the parts where I cut to prevent infection and potential rot. I've talked about the wonders of cinnamon and how it's an amazing organic way to prevent your cuttings from experiencing rot. Another thing you should do, or rather not do, and I recently made this mistake with one of my desert roses, is When you report a desert rose, first of all, these are not plants that you should report frequently, because reporting these guys, if there is any damage to their roots or their stem, it can lead to infection. When you do report this plant, only report it when it is root bound, by the way. When you do report this plant, please do not water immediately. Leave it to stay for about a week, a couple of days before you water. This is to ensure that any part that has been damaged while you're reporting the plant, any part will have properly calloused or calloused to a certain degree, to limit infection when you then water the plant. So whenever you report this plant, I'm going to reiterate this, whenever you report this plant, please leave it for some days, or I'll say a week. If you can stretch it to maybe 2 weeks, it's a drought tolerant girly, it will handle it. If you can stretch it to 2 weeks, then water it. Don't report and then water immediately. Now, one thing I've realized is that the roots of this plant is actually really tough and hardy. And if you have a setup where the plant dries out really fast, then you're less likely to encounter root rot. Like the name implies, this plant is native to parts of the world that get sporadic rainfall. So this is not a plant that likes to be in wet feet or in wet soil, or wants you to place it where it is constantly drenched in rain or water. Now, when I first started collecting these guys, I lost quite a few because I just couldn't get the watering right. But what has greatly helped me is terracotta pots. I am not the biggest fan of terracotta pots, but for certain plants like this, they literally are the difference between the plant being alive and you losing the plant to root rot. So I would strongly advise you grow your desert roses in terracotta pots. All my desert roses, both the ones I plan to have in the future, they will all be grown in terracotta pots because of the porous nature of these pots. Also, I want to state something very important that I feel like quite a number of people do not know. Now, because this plant is drought tolerant and because it is native to drier regions of the world, doesn't necessarily mean that if you keep this plant dry, it is going to look its best. In my experience, when your desert roses, although drought tolerant, when you leave them to stay dry for too long, they start to lose leaves. They just start to lose leaves and you end up with a really leggy, bare stem of a desert rose plant. And there's nothing that irritates me more than a desert rose that is not bushy. It's just bare stem because it has lost all or most of its leaves. So babes, please, if you want to maintain a bushy desert rose plant, I would strongly advise that you do not leave this plant to stay dry for a prolonged period of time. This also will affect the flowers. If you want to ensure that the longevity of the flowers is optimum, it's prolonged, do not leave this plant to stay dry for too long, because if it is left to stay dry for too long, not only will it lose leaves, but if the plant is flowering, the flowers will also quickly drop. So how will I advise you water this plant? It's very, very simple, babes. Just water the plant when it is dry. If you have a routine where the soil dries out fast and then you water it just as fast, you're gonna have a desert rose that is bushy and will just have this plump, bouncy, juicy, yummy effect. So,
Jesus!
Oh my God. See what happens? See what happens when you bounce it for too long. Now, the truth of the matter, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, is that I have seen this plant grow in the most rubbish clay-like soil. Like growers here, especially the more local growers here, like sometimes they will grow this plant in the soil is literally red clay, yet the plant is doing well, it is thriving, it is flowering, it looks so fat and chunky. So actually, I don't think this plant is picky and fussy about the type of soil it grows in. I've observed that the roots of this plant are really, really tough and it seems to be able to accommodate pretty much any type of soil. However, if you are not an experienced grower or an experienced gardener, one thing I've realized is that if you are an experienced gardener, you will be able to pretty much use any type of soil. You'll be able to know how to water with any type of soil. If you're the average grower like you and I, then I will say please go for soil that is more amended. If you can get soil that dries out fast and that it is porous, these guys, like I said, are native to Sahel and arid regions. So those regions, their soil tends to be a bit porous and sandy. If you can incorporate that porosity and even maybe add some grit and sharp sand to your mix, while also having a substrate or a medium or a soil that retains some water to a certain degree, because you don't want something too porous that will just dry out so fast. You want something that's fast draining but can also retain some moisture. I believe if you can come up with that combination, then this plant will do absolutely well. Fast draining soil, but one that can, retain some moisture to a certain degree. Pair it with your terracotta pot and then you're good to go. You will not encounter root rot. It's actually an easy plant. Do not let this video scare you, but once you have mastered how to prevent stem rot and how to prevent root rot, then you will not encounter any issues with this plant whatsoever at all. That was why I had to get that out of the way. Okay, so now we have tackled all the technical stuff. Let's talk about the fun stuff, like how to actually get your desert rose to flower and to produce these beautiful, impeccable blooms. So when it comes to getting your desert rose to flower, there are three very, very important things that you need to get right. The first is you need to prune your desert rose, babes. I can't decide whether to hold this mic like this or whether to clip it. Please let me know in the comments, which do you prefer? But like I was saying, babes, you need to prune your desert roses if you want to ensure that it has a lot of blooms. Because let me tell you, the more you prune your desert roses, the more it is going to branch out. Most times, or in some cases, you might get a desert rose and it's just going to have one single branch. The problem with that is that it produces flowers per branch. Do you get what I mean? So if you have one single branch, you're going to end up with a plant that will just have one area where it produces flowers. However, if you prune it and it has multiple branches, the more branches that it has, the more it has the potential to bloom from those branches. And that's why this has a couple of branches that you can see. I've got blooms. I don't know, my tongue, I've talked too much. I have got blooms from each branch. And to my surprise, when I picked up this plant, you can see, I don't know if you can see, I'm going to insert a B-roll, but right over here, there's this spot, and then a bud is about to activate. So I'm potentially going to have a bloom from another part of the branch. So you see why you need to actually prune your desert roses to ensure that you have a desert rose that is not only bushy but also has lots of branches with blooms. Now, another thing to get your desert rose to bloom prolifically, in fact, this is the most this desert rose has ever bloomed for me. It's been in my care for a year and it has bloomed twice, but this second cycle it bloomed heavily and prolifically because I did something different. I fertilized more. The more you fertilize these girlies, especially if you use a fertilizer that is high in potassium. Hold on, let me show you the fertilizer that I use so you have a better idea, right? So this is the brand of fertilizer I use and I've honestly seen amazing results with it. It claims to be a balanced fertilizer and has a decent amount of potassium. The potassium level here is 5.8%. Now this is even old stock. I feel like the newer fertilizers out there are even higher in potassium, but this has been able to do a fantastic job getting, look at the blooms, look at the material. So you want a fertilizer that is balanced, that has some nitrogen but also has like potassium. Emphasis on potassium. Potassium is what will get these girlies as well as a lot of flowering plants to bloom. Another thing that goes without saying is they need direct sunlight to bloom. This is not a bright indirect light plant. If you want it to actually bloom, you need to take it away from shade and expose it to direct sunlight. However, there's a caveat behind it. So one thing I have learned is that yes, direct sunlight will cause this plant to bloom. However, the flowers can easily and quickly be damaged by intense sun. We had a very, very hot dry season this year, and although my desert roses all bloomed, their flowers were just constantly damaged, wilted by the direct fried basically by the sunlight. So I would advise that when you see that these guys have started to bloom prolifically, then maybe move them away from intense direct sunlight to shade, so that the sun doesn't scorch the flowers or doesn't damage the flowers, and ensures that the flowers last for longer. Now this one is actually flowering uncharacteristically and out of season because this is the rainy season. It's quite cloudy during this time of the year, but we've had an unusually sunny rainy season. This is why I said that this plant, when the apocalypse of global warming occurs, this plant will still be here standing and thriving. So we've had an unusually sunny rainy season, but it has also been intermixed with cloudy days, which is why these flowers have lasted for quite a long time, as opposed to during the dry season when it will get so hot that the flowers sometimes it feels like they will just literally melt away. So that's worthy of note. I think that's pretty much all there is to. Also, I forgot to mention this. I think I mentioned this earlier. Like, please ensure that your desert rose is hydrated when it is blooming. I think the main reason why I lost that bloom, and I also lost another bloom this morning, is because I hadn't watered this girly in a few days. When this plant is blooming, if you want those blooms to stay upright and to just stay perky, then don't leave the plant to stay too dry, so it can sustain all these blooms and be perky. If not, the blooms will just drop. Okay, please, is this video making sense so far? I haven't done a care video in a long time, so like it low-key feels like I'm not am I rambling? Please, if you're enjoying this video, please let me know and like hit that thumbs button, and please subscribe if you haven't. Okay, so let's talk about pest, babes. Now this plant is mostly pest free, but you will encounter two very annoying pests on these plants from time to time. It's not the most pest prone plant there is, but you may encounter these two. The first is aphids. Aphids absolutely love desert roses. In fact, I've come to realize that aphids, they have a thing for plants that flower, because not only do I encounter most of them on my desert roses, I also encounter them on like my hibiscuses as well. However, aphids are actually really easy to get rid of. Please do not fret. You can easily use the high pressure hose to just flush them away. You can manually use a brush to shoo them away, or if you want to take drastic measures, then a systemic will work wonders against them. Another issue that you may encounter is mealybugs as well. Now, I've found that mealybugs, if you are growing this plant in areas where it is not getting enough direct sunlight or heat, mealybugs will appear. Mealybugs do not like heat and sun. So if you are growing your desert rose in a place that is too shaded, the mealybugs will just appear. The only reason why I do not typically encounter mealybugs in my desert roses is because they are all placed in areas that are just so hot and sunny that the mealybugs do not stand a chance to grow to just proliferate in such areas. So if you're encountering mealybugs, then please, you need to expose your desert rose to more direct sunlight, move it to a sunnier spot, and that should limit the mealybug issue. But again, mealybugs are quite easy to treat. In my opinion, they're not so difficult to get rid of. Your neem oil is great, and then if the infestation is a lot, then you may want to resort to using a systemic, and that should put them at bay. So babes, I think that's pretty much it. I feel like I've said all I need to say about how to take care of this plant. It's an easy plant, babes. Once you've gotten, put it in a sunny place and you're able to prevent stem rot and root rot, you are pretty much good to go. The plant pretty much takes care of itself. I hope this video has taught you how to grow a beautiful blooming specimen. Okay. If you enjoyed this video, guys, give it a thumbs up, and I'm gonna see you in the next one as usual. Bye.